For over 2 decades, Raymond Ellis was a ghost in his own life. A man with hands calloused by violence and eyes dulled by regret, he spent 24 years behind the walls of Folsom State Prison, convicted of second-degree murder in a robbery gone sideways. But this isn't a story about the crime. This is about what came after. Raymond never denied what he did. On a storm-soaked night in 1998, high on meth and dragging behind months of unemployment and debt, he broke into a liquor store just outside Sacramento. The clerk, Luis Mendoza, a father of 3, was closing up when Raymond pulled a gun. The bullet fired too fast. Too easy. A single second that would fracture 2 families forever. Luis was dead. Raymond was sentenced to 35 years. And the world moved on. But guilt doesn't move on. It festers. It whispers at night. It eats away at a man until he's nothing but skin stretched over penance. 4 years, Raymond refused parole hearings. Said he didn't deserve sunlight. But something shifted in 2011. It began with a letter. From inside a cheap manila envelope came words that would change everything. You don't know me, but I knew my father through the stories people told me. His name was Luis Mendoza. I've hated you my whole life. But hate is a prison, too. And I don't want to be in it anymore. So I'm writing to say, I forgive you. And I hope you forgive yourself someday. Mateo. Raymond didn't know how to process it. The letter sat on his bunk for months, unread and folded. But something in it, something beyond pity or performance, pierced the years of static in his soul. For the first time, he wondered if there could be a way forward. Not out of prison, but out of the man he had become. Raymond enrolled in a restorative justice program. Not just therapy or rehab, but something deeper. He met with victims of violent crimes, listened to their grief, and, eventually, told his own story. At first, other inmates mocked him. Redemption wasn't currency in a place like Folsom. But slowly, the walls cracked. In 2014, he earned his GED. In 2015, he began teaching other inmates how to read. By 2017, he was counseling new arrivals, young men who reminded him too much of his past self. Word spread. Even the guards noticed. And then, the twist. In 2018, Raymond was called to the warden's office. A strange request had come through official channels. A private mediator working for the Mendoza family wanted to meet him. At first, Raymond said no. The guilt was too much. But then he remembered the letter. That's how, 20 years after the crime, Raymond Ellis came face to face with Mateo Mendoza. It wasn't a courtroom. It wasn't a staged confrontation. It was a small room in the prison chapel. No cameras. No lawyers. Just 2 men and 2 decades of grief. Raymond trembled as he spoke. He described the night. The rage. The addiction. The instant regret. How every day since had felt like a curse he willingly bore. And then he did something he hadn't done in 24 years. He cried. Mateo didn't cry. He just listened. And then, in a voice steadier than expected, he said, My father was more than the way he died. But I believe people are more than their worst moment, too. He stood up. He shook Raymond's hand. The story went public weeks later. Newspapers called it a miracle. A murder, followed by forgiveness. But Raymond never wanted fame. When he was offered early release in 2019 due to his model behavior and new restorative laws in California, he accepted, but insisted on one condition, that he be placed in a halfway house near the Mendoza family's community so he could volunteer. Yes, volunteer. The man who once destroyed lives began building them back. Raymond spent the next 3 years working in the same neighborhood where he committed the crime. He picked up trash on the sidewalks. He worked nights in a food pantry. He helped ex-cons fill out job applications. One day, he even repaired the broken sign on the old liquor store, which had been turned into a youth center. He didn't preach. He didn't pretend to be a saint. But his actions began to echo. And that's when something unexpected happened. A city council member, whose own brother had been incarcerated, approached Raymond in 2022 with a proposal, helped design a new community initiative called Project Forward, a program pairing reformed ex-offenders with at-risk youth for mentorship. Raymond hesitated. He didn't think anyone would want to be mentored by a killer. But he was wrong. Over 300 applicants flooded in during the first month. Kids who had grown up surrounded by crime but saw in Raymond something they'd never seen before, a man who climbed out of the pit and didn't pretend the pit wasn't real. And then came the cliffhanger. Last month, Raymond disappeared. He left behind a single note at the community center, handwritten and sealed in an envelope. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm not running from something, I'm running toward something. There's a truth I haven't told. A piece of the past that even I tried to bury. I need to make it right before time runs out. If I come back, you'll understand everything. If I don't, tell them I tried. No one knows where he went. Not even Mateo Mendoza. Police say there's no warrant. No crime. Just a man who once vanished into prison, vanishing again into purpose. But what is Raymond chasing now? What piece of the past threatens to undo everything? The trail Raymond left was faint, like he intended to vanish without a trace. But Raymond Ellis wasn't a man who ran from accountability. He'd already spent most of his life confronting his demons. So when he disappeared, the people who knew him best, those he mentored, those he served, didn't believe it was escape. They believed it was unfinished business. It took 3 weeks to find the first breadcrumb, a faded address scribbled in the margin of an old workbook Raymond once used while tutoring inmates. The name next to it read L. Sims. The name meant nothing to the case. Nothing to Mateo. Nothing to the community. But it meant everything to Raymond. Leroy Sims was an enforcer for the Dogwood Syndicate in the 90s, a street-level gang responsible for a wave of drug trafficking and armed robberies in Northern California. According to records, he vanished after a plea deal in 1999. He'd flipped on his own crew. Disappeared into witness protection. Most assumed he was dead or living under a false name in some sleepy southern town. But Raymond knew better. Because Leroy Sims was the man who gave him the gun that killed Luis Mendoza. Raymond hadn't planned to kill anyone that night. He only wanted enough money to pay off his dealer. But Leroy handed him a rusted .38 in a parking lot and said, "Don't come back empty." What Raymond never told the court, what he never admitted even in the depths of his soul, was that Leroy had pulled the strings long before Raymond ever set foot in that store. That's the secret he'd buried. The shame too heavy to name. Raymond's journey took him through Bakersfield, Fresno, then Nevada. Motel to shelter. Shelter to church. Always asking quiet questions about a man named Sims. He grew thinner, older. But his eyes, those eyes burned with purpose. Meanwhile, back in Sacramento, whispers began. Someone broke into a closed case file room at the Department of Justice. Not a theft, just a viewing. Witness protection lists. Plea deals. Sealed documents. Security footage revealed a gray-haired man in a janitor's uniform. Raymond. Finally, after nearly 5 weeks, someone spotted him in Elko, Nevada, sitting alone in the back of a dusty old diner. Across from him sat a man with a limp, thick with age and bitterness. The man's name was Reverend Leonard Sims. Yes, Reverend. Leroy Sims had disappeared into a new life. Rebranded himself as a spiritual leader in a small mining town. He ran addiction meetings. Helped local parolees. He preached about grace. About letting go of who you were. And Raymond Ellis, the man who bore the weight of his past like a scar etched on stone, had come to ask him one question. Do you still remember the night you made me a murderer? Witnesses say the two men didn't raise their voices. They just spoke. For over 3 hours. And then, Raymond did the unthinkable. He handed Leroy a tape recorder and said, "It's your turn now. Tell them what really happened. Tell them how many young men you pushed into the fire while you watched from the shore." The next morning, Raymond turned the tape into local authorities and walked away. Within days, federal agents were involved. The recording implicated not only Leroy, but a network of other former gang members, some now in corporate security, some working in private contracting, all with ties to the criminal underworld. Raymond returned to Sacramento, quietly. No press. No parades. Just a final letter to Mateo Mendoza. "I thought my redemption came from living right after what I did. But I was wrong. Redemption isn't a destination. It's a door you open for others, even if it crushes you on the way out. Your forgiveness gave me the courage to tell the whole truth. I don't know what happens now, but I'm ready for it. I.e. Raymond turned himself in to federal prosecutors, confessing that he'd withheld information about the crime in 1998. He could have stayed silent. He had nothing to gain and everything to lose. But in the end, he chose truth over peace. And the justice system made a choice of its own. Instead of prosecution, Raymond was asked to testify, formally, against the newly unearthed syndicate players. A secret task force had already begun pulling at the threads. Raymond's evidence became a cornerstone. His story wasn't just personal anymore. It was pivotal. But here's where the story takes its final, haunting turn. On the day of his first testimony, Raymond Ellis never arrived at the courthouse. Security footage last captured him near the river, standing at the edge of the pedestrian bridge he crossed every day after mentoring youth. His bag was found nearby. Inside, a single page. My debt is paid. Not by the years I served, but by the truth I gave. If I don't make it to court, know this, I did not run. I walked into freedom. No body was ever recovered. No suicide confirmed. No foul play proven. Some believe he took his own life. Others whisper he was silenced, his testimony too dangerous for those it could expose. But the people he helped? They don't mourn him like a lost soul. They remember him as a man who died standing up, a man who chose redemption, not as a reward, but as a responsibility. The disappearance of Raymond Ellis should have ended the investigation. No witness, no testimony, no conviction. That's how these stories usually go: loose ends, buried secrets, and the quiet erasure of a man who knew too much. But Raymond wasn't just any witness. He had prepared for this. And what he left behind, what he risked his final breath to protect, would crack open a conspiracy decades in the making. It started with the box. Inside the battered community center locker that Raymond had once used daily, the director found a showbox labeled only with a single word, debt. Tucked inside were 3 cassette tapes, a worn-out flash drive, and handwritten transcripts. The contents were explosive. Raymond had recorded every conversation with Leroy Sims. Every whispered name. Every coded reference to the old Dogwood Syndicate's transformation into a modern-day criminal network embedded within private security firms, lobbying organizations, and government contractors. It wasn't just about the gun he was given in 1998. It was about how many guns. How many boys. How many Raymonds were shaped and steered and destroyed by men who profited from chaos. Raymond had traced the chain of command. On the flash drive were names, ledgers, payoffs. Even internal memos from a now-defunct consulting firm that once worked for the State Corrections Board. The same firm that had lobbied for harsher sentencing laws that fed prisons with bodies like his. This wasn't just about crime. This was about business. The media exploded. Headlines screamed. Ex-convicts files expose syndicate's political ties. Redemption turns revolutionary, the man who tried to save us all. The Department of Justice launched an inquiry. At least 7 former officials were indicted. 2 corporate executives were arrested attempting to flee the country. An emergency audit of private prison contracts was ordered. And buried in the middle of it all, in every affidavit and press release, was one name, Raymond Ellis. A man whose life began in silence and ended in seismic truth. But for Mateo Mendoza, the son of the man Raymond had once killed, none of this was abstract. To him, Raymond's final act wasn't heroic, it was devastating. He'd finally begun to heal with Raymond alive. Forgiveness had tethered them, strangely, beautifully. And now, Raymond was gone. Again. Mateo spoke at a candlelight vigil outside the youth center. His voice cracked, but his words landed like thunder. I used to think justice was putting a man in a cage and throwing away the key. But now I know, it's giving someone a reason to never go back to that cage again. Raymond didn't just change his life. He changed mine. And I won't let his truth die in the shadows. Mateo launched the Ellis Foundation weeks later, a non-profit dedicated to restorative justice, education for incarcerated youth, and protecting whistleblowers in the criminal justice system. The foundation is now active in 16 states. And yet, 1 year to the day after Raymond's disappearance, a strange package arrived at Mateo's office. There was no return address. Inside was a photograph, slightly faded. It showed a man with a graying beard, standing barefoot in a garden. In the distance, a quiet coastal town, possibly Chile or southern Spain. The man was turned just slightly from the camera, but it was unmistakable. It was Raymond Ellis. Taped to the back of the photo was a note in Raymond's handwriting. "I didn't choose to live. I was chosen to keep living. I gave them the truth. But someone gave me a second chance. Tell them to keep building. And tell Luis, thank you for his son." Mateo never released the photo to the public. He never confirmed or denied the message. Some believe it was staged. Others believe Raymond faked his death to avoid retaliation. And some, those who truly knew him, believe he walked away to give the movement a symbol more powerful than any man. A life reborn not in freedom, but in purpose. Raymond's story has since been taught in law schools, played in high school auditoriums, and quoted by activists around the world. But the truest lesson came not from what he did, but from what he chose not to do. He never begged for forgiveness. He never demanded a clean slate. He never asked to be seen as anything other than what he was. A man who failed, fell, and stood back up again. Redemption, he proved, isn't granted by courts or articles or applause. Redemption is earned in silence. Brick by brick. Life by life. And sometimes, when the world forgets that, someone like Raymond reminds us all. This has been The Unexpected Path to Redemption, the true story of Raymond Ellis. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of justice, truth, and second chances.